This thing, I think it does have some alcohol in it. I think it does. Like more than a beer. You could like sneaky get people drunk with this thing.
So I'm gonna be making some alcoholic kombucha because I've been really into kombucha brewing lately. For those who aren't familiar, kombucha is a fermented sweet tea. It can be drank on its own, or most people, add fruit flavorings and bottle it. It's a tasty beverage. It's got a lot of health benefits, but it's also really fun to make. Honestly, I like the experimentation of it. I can kind of just add whatever fruit or really anything that I have lying around in the kitchen. That's what draws me to it, is that I don't need to like follow a certain recipe. I just kind of can just make it and just like experiment and see how it turns out, and try to iterate and improve on it. So I wanted to continue my experiments a little further and try a kombucha with alcohol in it. And being a beer nerd that kind of likes hoppy beers, I decided I wanted to do something to try to mimic that flavor. I'm gonna try to add some hops and some like lemon flavor and just kind of see how it turns out. So I first started by researching the recipe that I wanted to use and drawing out a plan, just typing out some notes. I wanted something to reference throughout the process because a lot of this is just waiting and doing things on the right days. Before creating an alcoholic kombucha, you first just need a regular batch of kombucha. I'll link some videos in the description, but for a gallon batch, the typical recipe is about 5 bags of black tea, a cup of sugar, and a couple cups of kombucha starter liquid, which is just kombucha from an old batch. You can buy a SCOBY and starter liquid online. You can get one from a friend, or you can grow one from a bottle of just original unprocessed, like an original, it's like original GT, third, organic and raw kombucha. So I had the SCOBY and starter liquid from a previous batch of mine. The SCOBY looks pretty gross, and it is pretty gross. Trust me, it's normal, it's like healthy, it's part of the kombucha brewing process. If you've ever drank a bottle of kombucha before, a SCOBY like this was part of that process. And some people like them, some people even eat them. I just kind of keep it in there and then throw it away when it gets too big. So I brewed the tea and let it steep for a while. I actually kind of forgot that I didn't remove the paper labels on the tea bags here.
So mistake number one, shouldn't have brewed the tea with paper tags on the tea bags. Yeah, they're in there too. Shouldn't have done that.
I was honestly kind of worried this would mess up the batch. And I didn't want, you don't want paper pulp in your kombucha in the finished product. So I had to take the extra step and go and filter out all of the entire batch that I just made. Next time I would definitely remove those little paper things on the tea bags. Once it was below 90 degrees-ish, I added the SCOBY and the starter liquid. If it's too hot, it'll kind of kill it, so you want to make sure it's cool enough to add it. So I added my SCOBY and starter liquid, covered with a cloth and a rubber band, and went and let it sit in the closet for a few days.
A few moments later.
So I did something stupid, and I forgot to put sugar in. I should have done it when it was freaking warm. That was the dumbest thing I've ever done. Okay, one last step. Here we go.
You ideally want your sugar dissolved, which is a whole lot easier when the water is warm, like right after brewing the tea. I just forgot in this case, so I just tried to add it after the fact and tried to dissolve it the best that I could. So 2 days in, I was worried about mold, which is like the classic thing to do if you brew kombucha, because it always looks so weird when you're first kind of growing that SCOBY on top. I swear the SCOBY always looks really similar to like a mold at first when it first starts growing.
It does look pretty gross.
Oh.
I think this is okay though. So mold is if it's actually like fuzzy on top, and it's not really that fuzzy and it's actually getting a little bit better.
Sure enough, I mean, this has happened multiple times to me. You just let it sit a lot longer and then it develops into something more normal looking. I let mine sit for close to a week before tasting it, and this time will vary based on temperature. The hotter it is, the faster it'll ferment. But ideally, I wanted something kind of vinegary, but also still a little bit of sweetness left in it still. So by default, kombucha really is not an alcoholic drink. The kombucha yeast in an aerobic environment, which lets oxygen in and out, It breaks down the sugar and leaves behind a lot of healthy acids, but very little alcohol. A typical kombucha is like 0.5% alcohol. So for this kombucha to start producing some real alcohol, it needs a different type of yeast, and it needs to switch to an anaerobic fermentation environment. I've got this jar with an airlock, which will only let air out and not in, and get us that anaerobic fermentation, which means more alcohol. So I went to my local homebrew store, picked up some ale yeast and some flavorings. I know I wanted some hops, so I got some citra hops, and then I just wanted some other random flavorings. I just picked out lemongrass and lemon peel. Feel free to experiment with really whatever flavorings you would want here. That's kind of the fun of it. So to get the new yeast started, I combined a cup of water and a cup of sugar, and I boiled the water to get the sugar dissolved quicker, not realizing how long it would take to bring that water back down to a temperature to where I could put the yeast in. So if I did this again, I would not boil the water, I would just do lukewarm water. But having that sugar water mixture with the yeast gets it really started and going, and all that extra sugar really will add to the batch and make it produce a lot more alcohol. So I combined that water, sugar, ale yeast mixture, put it in the airlock container, and then added all the kombucha. And then added all my hops, lemongrass, and lemon peel, just kind of guessing at the amounts, and gave it a good shake, and she was off. I could see bubbles at the top pretty immediately, and these small bubbles kind of continued for the whole time. I mean, I checked on it occasionally, and it was bubbling a little bit and burping a little bit, but not a crazy amount of fermentation activity compared to beer or others, but I did notice those little bubbles in there the whole time, which was a good sign. I let it sit for about a week, although I completely forgot that my instructions said to take the hops out after 2 days. So I was a little worried that it was going to be completely overblown with hoppiness. So I took it down after 7 days, gave it a taste, and it was actually pretty good. Like, I actually liked the flavor. I thought it was solid and not too hoppy. I do like the hoppy flavor though, so you know, it depends on what you're looking for. There was still a little bit of sweetness left in there, which is good. You still want a little bit of sweetness when you put it in the bottle so that it'll carbonate. So bottling is the last step in this process, where the remaining sugars get processed by the yeast, and the oxygen that it produces can't escape anymore. It gets stuck in the bottle, which creates this nice carbonation and a nice dry finish to it. I strained my batch here first to make it easier to pour, and then used a funnel to fill up all these flip top bottles that I have. These flip top bottles are great. They're reusable. They can withstand enough pressure for all the carbonation that this withstands. Be careful, not all bottles are meant for this type of pressure. If you use a square bottle, or if you use bottles that are more decorative and not for actual fermentation, they can explode, and that does happen to people fairly regularly, so be careful. So I let them bottle for 4 to 5 days. After about the 5th day, I could tell that they were very well carbonated, so I went ahead and popped them in the fridge to kind of chill that fermentation process. And then they were ready to drink.
This is delicious. Yeah, I'm impressed. It doesn't taste very boozy, definitely very bright, definitely a lot of citrus in there. But it comes out, it's not too sweet. It's actually pretty dry, which is pretty awesome. And I'm surprised I don't taste much alcohol, because I think it's kind of strong. Really, it tastes more like a beer than it tastes like kombucha. This thing, I think it does have some alcohol in it. I think it does. Like, more than a beer. I feel a little bit more than I would of a beer this, like a normal beer this size. Good old citra hop booch.